When my family moved into a new home, everything was normal. It was in the suburbs of Ann Arbor in York Township. Nothing seemed off about the house when we bought it. It was an average 2-story house, a replica of its neighbors. When I saw it for the first time, I couldn't help frowning. I'd lived in Detroit almost my whole life, so having my life upended so we could come here to Ann Arbor made me very unhappy. I wouldn't be able to see my friends anymore, and wasn't reassured by my mother saying that I would make new friends here, but at least my family could drive to Detroit. For the first few weeks, everything was normal. We settled in and got to know the neighbors. My dad enrolled me in the nearest school, and I made a few friends. The floorboards would creak and sound like footsteps, or I'd feel a chill of the wind through a window one of my parents had left open. Stuff that would have made me think the house was haunted, if my parents hadn't taught me to always think of things rationally. All in all, I was getting used to it, and while I missed Detroit, I didn't want to run away to spite my parents. One day, I was home alone. This was well before the era where children had to have constant supervision of some kind, and if they were seen to be old enough, they could be trusted to take care of themselves. I was doing homework in my bedroom when I heard a floorboard creak above me. I ignored it. Then another floorboard creaked, and another, and I realized that no, that wasn't a floorboard swelling. Those were footsteps. My parents had taught me to always call the police if I thought something was wrong, but at that moment, I couldn't move. I could only stare up at the attic above my head as slowly, heavy footsteps thumped over me, crossing to one side and then going back, pacing like a caged animal. Back and forth, back and forth. Then the footsteps stopped, directly above me, and I felt something glaring down at me through the ceiling. I felt cold. When I breathed, a white mist came out of my mouth. I was shivering. Everything was forgotten except the ceiling. It was covered by thin white paint, smooth as a pebble on the seashore. And through it came a low, raspy growl, hungry and in pain. It lasted less than a second, but to me, might as well have encompassed an hour. Then the chill left me. I suddenly took in a massive breath, then bolted upright, flinging my homework down to the floor and rushing downstairs. I grabbed the phone and dialed 911. All I told them was that someone was in my attic and I was home alone. The dispatcher stayed on the line with me, assuring me a squad car was on its way at this moment. The police arrived in under 5 minutes. One stayed with me while the other checked the attic. When he came down, without a man in handcuffs, I felt whatever hope I'd had die. "There's no one up there," the police said. "Son, are you sure you heard something in that attic?" "Yes, sir," I said instantly. "I heard footsteps, and they stopped right above my head." I thought for a moment that they'd laugh and say I had an overactive imagination, but the 2 policemen just exchanged a glance and then looked at me. They seemed troubled. "We'll wait with you until your parents show up. Is that okay?" I nodded, happy not to be alone in this house. When my parents did return, they weren't mad at me for calling the police. Both officers stressed that nothing had been in the attic, but given how scared I was, they were sure I had heard something. They advised security cameras be installed. "Why?" my dad asked, flabbergasted. "What for?" "Sir, I didn't see any evidence that someone had been in the attic, but your boy here, he heard something. Not to mention your attic has a window, which I noticed was open. So I do believe someone got into the attic. Whoever it was, I have a suspicion they will be back." And after that, they left. When I was sent to bed that night, Mom and Dad told me that if anything was wrong, just to call them, they'd be downstairs. My head was laying on the pillow, looking up at the ceiling. I kept replaying the events of the day in my head. I know I heard someone walking above me. I know I had felt that cold spot. I hadn't told either one of the policemen about it, because I wasn't sure how I could explain it. Someone had been in the attic, but that cold chill and that feeling of eyes boring straight into my skull, how did I explain that? How did I make them believe me? The next thing I knew, I was in the attic, surrounded by darkness. A blast of cold air washed over me, chilling my bones and making me shudder. Then I heard the heavy, pondering footsteps pacing across the floor, from one side to the other, without any purpose. As my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I made out shapes and forms. One of them was moving. Then it stopped, turned, and faced me. It was a tall, gaunt man, so emaciated his bones stuck out against his skin, revealing almost his entire skeleton. His hair was sparse and hung in thin strands around his bald head, revealing 2 nubs where his ears had been. His eyes were sunken into his skull, 2 pinpricks of black in a mass of pale white, staring into me with cold intensity. His mouth hung open, revealing broken and crooked yellow teeth. His tongue was a white and red slab of meat in his jaw, dry and mummified. A harsh, raspy croak echoed from his mouth, and he slowly turned his body until he was facing me, and took a step forward, an arm raised upward. Yellow fingernails reached out at me, so irregularly grown they seemed like the claws of some animal. Then the other leg lifted, fell to the floor, and dragged itself along the wooden floorboards. I watched, helpless and unable to move, as the gaunt man seemed to force his body to move toward me. Fingers splayed open like a spider's web. The open palm slowly filled my vision, wide enough to cover my entire face. I felt cold, clammy skin touch me, and then I woke up with a horrible scream. I screamed for my mom and dad, throwing off the covers and running downstairs. My mom was the first to reach me, dressed in a white nightgown. She didn't say anything, just bent down and scooped me up in her arms, holding me close as I sobbed about the gaunt man. "It was just a nightmare, sweetie," my mother cooed into my ear, stroking the back of my head tenderly. "It was just a nightmare." "Carol?" It was my dad, and I glanced over his shoulder to see his broad shoulders and towering frame come into view. "Carol, what happened?" "Gregory had a nightmare, Richard," my mom told him. "He's probably still shaken up from when he heard footsteps in the attic." My dad sighed, running a hand through his hair. He donned a cocky smirk as he brought his warm, smiling face down to my level. "Well, buddy, I know that must have been scary, but I'm sure whatever it was will be smarter before coming back here and facing your dad." There was a thump from upstairs. My dad's smile vanished. I felt my mother's body tense up. Both of them glanced upward at the ceiling. Another thump, and then another. I knew what it was in an instant. "It's back," I whimpered. "It's back in the attic." My parents didn't say anything, just stared in mute shock as the footsteps plodded slowly across the attic. I felt the hairs on my body stand up as goose flesh raced across me, something I saw also on my dad and mom. A sharp, intense cold spot came over us as something passed overhead slowly. We listened in a horrified trance to the slow, heavy footsteps above us. When they came to a stop, it was directly above me. Not my parents, just me. And I felt that same intense stare chill me to the bone. My breath came out as a white mist. A sound reached my ears. It traveled into my eardrums and clawed at my brain, sinking its fangs into my mind. A harsh, raspy, crooked excuse for breathing. My heart hammered in my chest, ready to break out of my ribcage to escape the thing in the attic. The raspy breathing got louder and louder until I felt like it was coming from right beside me. "Richard?" my mother said softly. "Richard, what is that?" My dad opened his mouth, eyes transfixed on the ceiling, then closed it again, shaking his head. And then it stopped, just stopped, like someone had flipped a switch and shut it off. My dad shivered, rubbing his hands against his arms as he shook his head. "No sense," he said softly. "That made no sense." "Richard," my mom said, "what was that?" "I don't know," my dad said, still shaking his head. "I don't know, but I'll call someone in the morning. In the meantime, you and Gregory just stay in the living room." And that was the first of the Gaunt Man's haunting. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed this story. If you would like to hear part 2 of the Gaunt Man's hauntings, make sure to subscribe. And if you have a story you'd like to share, send it to story@mrsnightmare.com. Thank you.